All right, welcome back to Ottawa Studios of Inside My Canoe Head. I am your host, Dr. D. Today, we are going to talk about the tough, crazy world that's out there and what the heck can you do to get out in front of it. Sit back, grab yourself your favorite beverage. This is going to be a ride. All right, thanks again for reaching out and joining us today. Listen, the world's on fire. We see it. We know it. What we do about it, it's a crazy place right now. I don't know whether you're concerned about the Hamas-Israeli conflict, the bringing in of Hezbollah, the recent shooting down of the Iranian drones, whether it's Ukraine and Russia, and you're concerned about the fact that as it gets pushed from page A1 to A2, it loses support, which means maybe the U.S. Congress doesn't get that passed and Ukraine doesn't get what it needs. Economic downturn. We have all the indicators are pointing to some tough economic times ahead, and the government is spending like a drunken sailor. Those two things working together never come with a positive outcome. Maybe it's just stress, fatigue, anger. We have a lack of societal emotional intelligence right now. Everybody seems to be getting bent around the axle about everything. We have the U.S. election coming. We have political violence happening around the world. We have examples of libertarian governments in Argentina doing certain things. We have near fascist governments in Brazil doing different things. We still have Venezuela threatening to invade one of its neighbors. We have a whole host of conflicts and disruptions around this world. And we have cultural clashes across Europe. It hasn't been, if you know your history, near 1,000 years, near 700 years since the last time there was a significant clash like we're seeing now between two dominant cultures in Europe. The world is not a calm and peaceful place. So what does that mean for you, your family, your loved ones, your hopes, your dreams, and everything that you're after? Well, our goal here today is to simply give you a couple of options, some different ways to look at it if you're interested in trying to figure out WTF it means for you and your family. If you're not, then sit back and maybe you could help somebody else who is totally bent around the axle, or somebody who's just generally concerned that their family may have some significant problems right around the horizon, and they're not sure whether they're ready, what steps they might want to take, how can they handle that type of things. Like, where do you begin? And that's the idea of what we're going to talk about here today on Inside My Canoe Head, is a way to do a review of your life, etc. And it's based upon the fundamental point of understanding your exposure to and dependency on the outside world to accomplish your life as you have designed it. Now, some when I say that don't really like that phrase because one of the fundamental problems we see all the time is that people don't want to accept responsibility or accountability for where they are, right? Everything has to be as a result of an exogenous shock. Everything that's I look in the mirror, things that are wrong with my life have to be the fault of somebody else. You know, it's the economy that sucks is why I have no money in my bank account. It's the rising prices. It's Galen Weston or some grocery giant's greed that's causing my lettuce to be so expensive. You know, it's always going to be somebody else's problem. And the idea about understanding that it's your dependency and that you design your life is saying it's a series of choices you made. Now, maybe there's a couple of great YouTubers that I follow. Gabe Bolt, B-U-L-T, and he did a recent video on I Design My Life, right? That's it. I design my life. Because it's, yes, I choose where I live, I choose who I live with, I choose what I do, I choose what I eat, I choose what media I consume, what social media I consume. So, like, I design my life without maybe not sitting down and doing it step by step, but you do it through the choices you make. And then there's another one, ecofriend.lia. She's a young German lady. She talks a lot about minimalism and very few things that you need to accept in life, but she's constructed a life that she enjoys, and she tells the world about it. So the idea about understanding your exposure to is you can have a holistic view of your whole life. You can tackle the world through each individual lens. So all of those things that I talked about that are going wrong with the world, you can choose to look at the world through each individual lens. Like, how's the U.S. election and politics going to hurt me? How is cultural classes across Europe? What about my own stress and fatigue? What about economic downturn and government changes or government spending, government whatever it may be? Maybe it's Israel-Hamas fight, whatever it might be. You can tackle those individually, or you can go on a holistic review. Now, for me, when I looked at this, the holistic review worked easiest, right? Because basically, I got to think about what things really are going to affect me. And when I sat down and did this about a little over a year ago, obviously the set of conflicts were actually somewhat similar, but everything wasn't the same. But you got to understand, the conflicts are going to come and go. It's more about understanding your exposure to. When you sit down, it's a methodology to understand your risk. Now, the most simplest forms we know, risk is a mathematical equation that's the probability of an event occurring multiplied by the potential severity of the outcome. So basically, how likely is it that something's going to happen? And if that thing was to happen, how bad is it going to hurt me? That's risk, right? So when you understand your risk, then determine based upon your personal risk tolerance, right? So we all have a different level of risk tolerance. We have those awesome friends. It's time to go camping for the annual camping trip or whatever. The guy will show up with an orange and a blanket and be happy for the whole weekend. Somebody else will show up with 45 pounds of the world's best gear for a weekend in a campground, right? So there's different people about risk tolerance, and it's built up because of a history of life experiences you had when you were younger all the way through life, but your self-efficacy, basically your self-confidence to handle a problem. If I was to ask you right now, how confident are you that you're going to be able to navigate through whatever thing it is on your own based upon the skills that you have, like the things that you're able to do and the knowledge that's in your head? Based upon that alone, I couldn't care less about tools, kit, and equipment. You know my rant against that stuff all the time. I want to know, based upon your self-efficacy, your self-confidence, your belief in yourself, how much risk do you accept? Are you somebody that needs to put on 3 safety harnesses when you go near the edge, or are you happy to wander the edge and look over just by holding on to a railing, right? We're all different. We're all slightly unique, shall we say. So that's your own. So you got to determine what is acceptable, right? And then what raises concern. Now, when something raises a concern, it's either going to fall into 2 barrels. It's either going to be a cautionary tale, something you might want to keep an eye on, or it's going to be a significant issue requiring attention. So you think of it this way. You're going to look at your life through the lens of a crazy upside down world. You're going to look at the possible effects, and then you're going to take that effect and you're going to throw it into one of 3 baskets. One is don't care, happy with it, risk tolerance, I can handle it. One is a cautionary tale. This thing raises my eyebrows slightly. I'm somewhat concerned. Maybe I should pay attention to this. And then you're going to have the other one that's like, you know what? Stop, drop, and roll. I have to deal with this. I can't accept this level of risk. So how do you frame that? Well, we frame it here very much like talking about the situation you live in, right? It's framed in you. So the location you live in, this physical location, so the city you live in, the type of housing you live in. This is a very similar to if you've taken our course, you'll be familiar with this if you've taken our online course that's available at preparednesslabs.ca, or you've read our ebook, Preparedness Simplified, Book 1, The Beginning, that's available again on preparednesslabs.ca, and it's sold on Amazon as an ebook. Basically, it's looking at your family and understanding all of those people that will return to you and look to you for guidance in tough, difficult situations, and then understanding their personal needs, their medical needs, their emotional needs, their spiritual needs, their financial needs, and basically understanding everything about them, and then understanding how they're likely going to respond in times of duress so that you can lead into that and be prepared for that ahead of time. It's kind of like the very same frame, except we use perspectives. Here we like to use 3 different perspectives: micro, meso, and macro. And we're going to go through each one here to give you examples. First of all, think about micro, which is the smallest. It's all about the individual and your immediate family. Think about, we talked about this in the podcast episode last week when we talked about you, your relationships, and your professional life. So when we looked at you, we want to look at your physical, your mental, and your financial health, right? So you look at those, are you happy with those? If you're not happy with them, what exposure do they have? So if you look at the lens of a political crisis, an economic crisis, a war, a conflict crisis, something along that lines, think about how are they going to affect your physical health, right? And a prime example for that is, do you live in a conflict area? Can you be physically hurt? Is that possible? So the likelihood of that kind of thing hurting you physically, maybe not that high at the micro level. But when you think about your mental health, think about whether you're going to become anxious. You're going to become stressed because of events that are happening in the Gaza Strip and the fight between Hamas and the state of Israel. As they fight for their own rationale, in Gaza, there's a million innocent civilians that get caught in the middle of war. Welcome to war. Happens every time. Not to diminish it, but that's just the reality of conflict. If that's causing you a lot of stress, if that's causing you a lot of anxiety, if you're having trouble sleeping at night, if you're having trouble concentrating on your work or your school because of something that happens on the other side of the world, it is having a micro effect on you. What do you do with that ball? Is that an acceptable level of risk, which means, you know what, I'm just going to handle it. I can navigate it. I'm just going to, no big deal. Is it a cautionary tale? You know what? This is really uncomfortable. If this persists and my reaction to it persists the way it does, it may cause me a lot of grief and difficulty in the future. I think I'm going to have to talk to somebody about this, and I may have to deal with this. I'm going to mark this in the cautionary tale. Or it's something right now that is causing me so much disruption in my life I need to address right now. Because remember, you and I can't address the Hamas-Israel fight. Like, that's far beyond our influence. There's absolutely nothing we can do to end that fight any sooner. You can protest and burn the frickin' city of Ottawa down, and it will have zero effect on anything that's happening on the other side of the world. Right? It'll just make you feel better because you yelled a lot. Fair enough. Whatever. The point is, all that you can influence is yourself. So, if that's in the red basket, if that's in the immediate concern basket, now you've identified something that is contributing at the micro level to your inability to rock an incredible life and chase your dreams. You looked at a situation, you determined the risk, you put it in the appropriate basket. Awesome. We carry on. You got to think about relationships, right? You may be married to or dating somebody with an opposite position on a politics, an opposite position on a war around the world, opposite position on economic struggle, etc., and that can cause some significant problems within the relationship. You have to understand. And at the micro level, folks, I mean, this is your life, right? You can't dismiss. A lot of people just dismiss it, whatever. Just people will get over it. Will they get over it? Look at the divisions in the pandemic, right? For the decisions people made to take or not to take a vaccine, to wear a mask or not wear a mask, to support or not support a government or their public health orders, to this day, people still say vile things regularly and with vigor about people in certain camps related to their decisions to that 4 years ago. Think about that, right? If you're a Democrat or Republican, maybe you can or cannot come for Thanksgiving dinner. There are people who think that way, right? Because I'm going to exclude you as a human being because of your political affiliation, right? That still exists. So it's real. It impacts how you do your life. It can impact a lot of things. Fights, ideology, you've got family involvement. Who knows? We might have somebody who is actually, your cousin may be Jewish and is fighting in the IDF, and your boyfriend hates Israel. How are you going to figure that one out, right? Is that that's a risk? I'll tell you that, because somebody's not going to like the answer they're going to get. Where does that fall? And these are real things that impact you, right? And the last part is your professional and your employment. Is your employer taking sides, right? Is your employer in an industry-specific business? For example, if you work in parts of the munitions industry in the province of Quebec, you can't really be calling for a ceasefire in global war because you build 155 millimeter artillery shells that kill a lot of people with one shell, right? You're in the business of doing that. So it's very hard for you to also be sitting there and politically running around calling for ceasefire and global peace while you're making a ton of money, making a ton of munitions, pardon the pun there. But that's really important. So when you think about the micro lens or the perspective, you're thinking about the immediacy of you and the immediate people around you, your bonding social capital, your one or two best friends in the world, your immediate family and the job you go to, those people that you interact with almost on a daily basis and are exceptionally important to you. How are these external crazy world risk that's happening, how's that impacting your ability to have a great you, which is your own physical, mental, and financial health, relationships with all the people that matter to you, and your professional life? How do you continue earning bucks and doing what you do in the middle of this chaos? That's you. So if we step it up to the meso level, now we're talking about communities, neighborhoods, and the city you look in. Think about cultural groups and political parties you may be a part of. For example, if you may be, a different side of the Jewish community, Orthodox or a moderate Jew, you may agree or disagree with the Benjamin Netanyahu's decision as the leader of Israel in his actions. You may agree or disagree with the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, actions as they've been taken on the ground. As a member of the community organization, neighborhood organizations, how does this impact community support organizations? That's one look through meso. The other interesting way that I look through meso is your support system. Now, this gets a little fun. Your food supply, right? Think about your food supply, your energy supply, and the economic industry in which you do business. How is that able to handle shocks from these events? So if you think about all the big bad events, again, if you've decided to do this type of review event by event and you're working your way through micro, meso, and eventually macro through, say, an economic shock or a political decision or a war in Ukraine, where do you get your food? And I mean this again, this is not an idea of buying any food. This is not about you spending any money, but it's about you understanding your food supply chain. This is really important at the meso level because you're not the only one using this food supply chain, but you understand this food supply chain. So where does your food come from? Right? So if it travels a long distance and it goes through several different countries and it's handed off by a whole bunch of different companies, every time each one of those events occurs, you add another point of failure along the supply system, which means it's open to a whole bunch of external and additional shocks. What are those outcomes? What are the possible outcomes of having that? For example, if you live where I do in Ottawa, Ontario, and you like strawberries, or say you like oranges in February, they're not coming from around here, right? We have very few places in the province of Ontario that could probably grow oranges, but I guarantee you none of them are growing them in February. So they're shipped from another part of North America and maybe Central America. Think of that travel. Now think of all of the geopolitical and economic issues that could impact that supply chain. So if that orange becomes a valuable, important part of your diet, you've exposed yourself to a risk where some event far beyond your control, one of those global crazy world things that are going on out there, can sever permanently or temporarily your access to this orange for an event that has nothing to do with you, is happening nowhere near you, but impacts you directly. So understand that. And I'll give you an idea of what I've been doing over the last little while. So I've been shortening my food supply. I don't have it perfectly into that idea of the 100-mile diet or the 150-kilometer diet or the 200-mile diet. I'm getting close, right? I get my meat, my fruits, and my vegetables all from local farmers. So all of those things come within 100 mile of my house, right? So you can all the main staples, absolutely without question, are raised and harvested within 100 miles of my home. So the things that are not are tea, coffee, certain spices, sugar, and a bunch of additives like that. But the main core components of my diet happen within here. Those core components require inputs that are from that 100 mile, right? So, in other words, my farmer, the farm that I use that's literally 30 kilometers from my home, where I get all of my vegetables and all of my fruit from, literally is an organic farm. They don't have any external inputs that is not local, right? They get a bunch of manure from they get a bunch of poop from the place where I get my beef from, which is a little farther away. It's about 100 to 150 kilometers away from here. A series of farms that are in a network where they go through a common butcher and they provide grass-fed beef, chicken, pork, turkey, whatever it may be. And then we have our local farmers here who have farm fresh organic eggs or regular eggs if you want them. But all of those things are within 100 miles, right? So you could literally shut down the entire food industry in California and Florida tomorrow, and my main food supplies would not stop. I might not get the coffee. I might not get a few other things on the side, but the main things I require for me and my family to be healthy, happy, and joyful will be totally unaffected if the U.S. border is permanently closed. Just think about that if you're a Canadian, right? Just think about what your food supply looks like when that is totally and utterly shut down, right? There you go. So that's an idea of looking at your food supply because that gives you a risk profile. Now, again, we wrap back to your risk profile. Is that an acceptable risk profile? I got that. I can handle that. I'm not worried about the oranges going away in Florida. No big deal, big fella. Nice try, but you're not getting me on that one. Put that in the perfectly happy. Actually, you can probably discard it and you don't concern about it ever again, right? But what if it's a cautionary tale, right? What if you really like your margaritas and there's no way you're using fake fruit, you want real fruit, and you can't make your favorite margarita or slushie without real fruit? Okay, now we're talking now. This is a cautionary tale. I got a cautionary tale. I got to pay attention to that and have a backup plan if something was to happen there. And then on the other side, you're a fruitarian. You've decided to adopt a diet where you eat nothing but fruit. You are in trouble in February where I live, right? Because every fresh fruit that you're getting, if you've decided I'm a fruitarian and I only eat fresh fruit, everything that you're getting is imported. You have a massive exposure to events that are beyond your control that can impact how you choose to live your life. Fair enough. Not going to belabor that anymore. But that's your economic industry and the shocks of which you're involved in to understand how that can influence how you choose your life. And the last one is the macro lens or the perspective, right? So the macro perspective is looking at everything from your country's perspective. Think about your nation, whatever wonderful nation you're listening to around the globe, and we appreciate it. We're currently downloaded in 58 nations around the world in over 800 different individual locations on 6 continents. We're not downloaded in Antarctica, though you never know, somebody down there at McMurdo Station may be listening to Inside My Canoe Head. If you are, shout out to you. Love you. You're awesome. Thanks for everything you do down there in the deep, dark Antarctica. So your government has, if you live in a democracy, it has the right to impose regulatory changes on your life to change how the world works. So basically governments have 2 levers to impact the life. So most, and I say most democracies are organized around the free market is the basic foundation. And the free market basically sees that 2 people have the ability to do free and unfettered trade for goods and services. I have a good or service. You have a money, for example, and you want to trade. That's a fair market. That's an open market. Now, the idea behind open markets is they're supposed to allocate the scarce resources that exist fairly. That doesn't always happen. Those 100% free market people, there are times when economics does not allocate scarce resources fairly. And those is what the government intervenes in a free market, and it can only do so with two things. One is taxation and one is regulation. Those are the only two things the government can ever do, right? And they're both brought in through legislation. Legislation they enact in your parliament or your Congress, acts and it changes law, and within the law there are a set of regulations, and in those regulations is where they change the things that you're allowed to do. So they impose restrictions on the freedom in the free market to the exchange of goods and ideas and the price points that they must be at, minimum wage, that kind of thing, rent control, all those things. The governments have the idea behind it. They're trying to achieve something, and they do that, right? Fair enough. And we saw in the pandemic, governments imposed movement restrictions, medical restrictions, and a whole bunch of restrictions on the population, right? All of those things can have direct impact on how you do your life, how you choose to live your life. For example, we had a number of companies that were doing construction cross-province, right? Because I live in the National Capital Region, they call it, and it's the border of La Belle Province in Quebec and Ontario. And a lot of people live and work in both provinces and back and forth. Well, they put their guards up and they stopped movement between the provinces. And all of a sudden, people couldn't get to work. People couldn't work on the jobs that they bid and won a contract on because they can't get their tools, kit, and equipment and their employees across the border. Or a whole bunch of instances where a whole bunch of unintended consequences happen, right? The government didn't maybe intend to kill your business, but the regulation killed your business, right? That was a sock beyond your control, but it impacted you and all of your employees, and it was done by your government, not by yourself, right? So thinking from the macro level is thinking about, you've heard that saying of 30,000 feet, right? When you go from macro down to meso down to individual, at the micro level, you're going from your 30,000 viewpoint to your 5-foot viewpoint. And the whole idea is, when you circle back at this crazy world, we've looked at it before. We've talked about a whole bunch of things. You really have conflict, where you have direct impact, and then you have a whole bunch of tertiary and secondary impacts that happen as a result of political and economic decisions, right? We have conflict, political, and economic decisions, and when they're made and they impact how you do your life, you've got to understand your risk. And the risk is a function of choices you've made. If you live in a democracy, you have the right to choose where you live, right? You can move from the town you're in. If you don't like it anymore, you don't like the mayor, you're free to move to a different town. So you choose to be there. You choose to live in the type of housing you do. Single family home, townhouse, fourplex. You live in a condo, high-rise apartment building, high-density housing, RV, way out in the country. Those are all things that you've chosen to do, and they all influence your exposure to the outside world, your exposure to and dependency on. Where do you get your power from? If you get it from here in the city of Ottawa, we get it from Ottawa Hydro, who gets it from Hydro One, which is the provincial, partially privately, partially publicly owned provincial entity that both generates and transmits power. Now, I'm exposed to the upsies, downsies of the power grid because I don't control it, right? So if I think there's something in my life that is of extreme high risk that I need to have if I no longer have access to my electrical grid, then now I got to sit down and what is the plan to deal with it, because I have to have this up and going. Very much like when we talk about your exposure to critical infrastructure, when we do family assessments in our video course, we talk about how to do that, how to sit down, have a holistic look at the 10 sectors of critical infrastructure and build a plan for you and your family about your risk tolerance and your risk profile. It's basically understanding in the simplistic of equation that I've made a series of choices. Here I am. Doesn't matter why. Here I am. I'm living in X and Y. I'm living my life this way, right? I decided to get this job. These are my friends. This is the relationships that I've chosen to have. This is the current state of my my financial, and my mental health. So this is the world as it is, all the result of good, bad, or indifferent decisions or indecisions that I made. And now I'm exposed to a whole bunch of risks that exist out in the world. So I'm going to look through either the micro, meso, or macro level, or I'm going to look at individual risk profiles from, your political, your economic, your conflict, or holistically. I'm basically going to categorize all the risks that I exposed to into those 3 barrels I talked about. The one that says, gotcha, bud, high five, no big deal, slam dunk, good to go. The other one is cautionary tale. Not too sure about this one. We're going to have to think about it. And then the one is that something I have to do about it. I don't have the risk tolerance to accept that level of risk. That's the purpose of understanding your exposure to and dependency on the big bad freaking world. And remember, we're going to close it out with a bit of returning to our Stoic big thinkers. My favorite book that's part of my daily read every day is called The Daily Stoic, right? It's by Ryan Holiday. Fantastic book. I journal with it and I read it in the morning. It's crazy close, but the idea here is there are a lot of really bad things happening to good people in the world, and it's pretty sad. Let's be brutally honest, right? There's no other way to explain it, and it sucks, right? And sometimes you get angry and frustrated, and you just don't understand why the hell this shit has to happen, right? Here we are. Everything in this world falls into one of 2 categories. It falls to things that are within your control, and you're actually in control of so very little. And the Stoics would argue that's precisely enough. And the other side of it is there things that are beyond your control. Things that you can't do, no matter what you do. So I live here in Ottawa, Ontario. No matter what I do in this city, all of those freaking things that are happening around the world are not going to change. All I'm doing it for, whatever pounding drums and walking around and waving and saying what I'm doing, that's for me, right? It's not going to change anything in the world. It'll have zero impact on anybody anywhere, right? The point is I have to decide the actual risk that I'm exposed to. And when things fall into the cautionary tale or into the red zone, I'm going to have to come up with a plan to get that risk out of the red zone, at least into the cautionary tale, to where we can keep an eye on things and manage it, or hopefully out of the cautionary tale over to the I got you, big fella, you are good to go bucket. You need to do that, because otherwise this world is only going to get more chaotic. I have said this from the beginning when we launched this podcast in 2020, based upon a lot of great thinkers, that 2020s is the most disruptive decade we've had since the 1940s for very good and very predictable reasons. And this will carry on to about 2032. So right now you've got about 7, 8 more years of this disruptive pattern before the world settles back down into the next world order that's going to govern humanity for 70 to 80 years. We've been doing this since the 1400s. Technology has just changed the extent and the type of conflicts we have. It's only going to get more disruptive. You need to get in front of and get a hold of your freaking risk profile now. Understand it. Put it in the buckets, and then the ones that need to be addressed, address them within the limited resources you have. And when I mean resources here at Inside My Canoe Head, I mean your time and your effort, not your financial resources. You don't need to buy a physical piece of good to add to your preparedness or to make your life easier. So hopefully this was helpful to you today. Hopefully some of the things that I talked about there, maybe it's just one thing that I talked about, one meso, one micro, one macro, one perspective, one risk profile, or something that I keyed in there that you realize, hey, listen, this thing over here is really driving me nuts. And you know what? I never thought I actually might not to be able to do anything about it. So now I have to change my emotional perspective. Wow. 100% within your control, 100% change your life. What an awesome idea. Thanks. Keep giving us feedback at jeff@preparednesslabs.ca. We've got a lot of great ideas coming up on Inside My Canoe Head, including our next podcast later this week that's going to be on a pretty cool subject. You're going to love it, all about the world of preparedness and how we help each other. We build communities and resilience one relationship at a time. Thanks again. Any comments you have, drop us over at jeff@preparednesslabs.ca. Drop over to the podcast website at www.insidemycanoehead.ca. Everything you need to know is there. Thank you very much. Take care. And the one only ask I have for you is this. Tell a friend. Tell a friend. Have them drop over. Listen to a podcast episode. It's free of charge. So take care. Stay safe. And have a great week.